Onesiphorus, imagine being locked in a cold cell, where the silence is interrupted only by the distant sound of footsteps echoing in the dark corridors. Loneliness weighs like a stone. The cold invades your bones, and your heart seems crushed by the feeling of oblivion. In this situation, each minute drags on like an eternity. But now, imagine that in the midst of this torment, you hear footsteps approaching. What would be just an ordinary sound becomes hope, because these footsteps do not belong to an indifferent guard, but to someone who faced challenges and dangers only to bring comfort and encouragement. It is in this scenario that we find the story of Onesiphorus, one of the most inspiring and little recognized figures in the Bible. He teaches us about the strength of faithfulness, the transformative power of small actions, and how a life dedicated to caring for others can leave a profound impact. Today, we will explore the story of Onesiphorus and the precious lessons it holds. Stay with me until the end, because the truths in this story can completely change the way you view your relationships and daily challenges. To understand the relevance of Onesiphorus, we need to return to the context in which he lived. It was the 1st century, a period in which the Roman Empire dominated much of the known world. Under the reign of Nero, being a Christian was not only a spiritual choice, but an act of extreme courage. Jesus' message was seen as subversive, threatening to the established powers, and those who declared themselves followers of Christ often faced severe persecution, imprisonment, and even public executions. In this scenario of oppression, we find the Apostle Paul, one of the greatest preachers and missionaries in Christian history. Responsible for writing much of the New Testament, he had dedicated himself completely to the work of God, traveling tirelessly to proclaim the gospel. But at that time, Paul was imprisoned in Rome, in a damp and dark cell, awaiting his trial before Nero, a ruler known for his cruelty and contempt for Christians. Paul's imprisonment was much more than a physical limitation. It was a true test of faith. He knew that his life was in the hands of an unpredictable and violent emperor. In addition, he faced the feeling of abandonment. Many of those who had previously walked by his side, those who had promised fidelity, had now left him. In one of his letters, Paul expresses his pain when he says, "All who are in Asia have deserted me." 2 Timothy 1 verse 15. This statement reveals a painful reality of the Christian journey. The journey of faith is not always accompanied by support or recognition. On the contrary, it often demands sacrifices that not everyone is willing to make. It was at this moment of helplessness that Onesiphorus entered the scene. Although we know little about his story, Paul's words in his letter to Timothy are enough to give us a glimpse of his extraordinary character. Onesiphorus was not someone driven by fear or convenience. He chose to stand out by demonstrating courage and loyalty at a time when it was easier to hide. Onesiphorus traveled to Rome in search of Paul, a move that may seem simple at first glance, but was incredibly dangerous. In that context, associating with a Christian prisoner was a risky act. After all, Nero himself sought to exterminate the followers of Christ, and anyone identified as an ally of Paul could face severe consequences, including imprisonment or even death. Despite this, Onesiphorus did not hesitate. He diligently sought out Paul, braving the dangers and challenges along the way. In meeting Paul, Onesiphorus brought not only words of comfort, but also a practical demonstration of care and faithfulness. He did not allow fear or hardship to stop him from doing what was right. His actions remind us that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness are not those done on a grand stage or with great fanfare, but those performed quietly, away from the spotlight, to help someone in need. Onesiphorus' life teaches us that true courage lies not in the absence of fear, but in the willingness to act in spite of it. It also challenges us to reflect on our own attitudes. How many times have we failed to help someone out of fear of what others might think or for personal convenience? How many times have we allowed fear to paralyze us, preventing us from being a source of support for those in need? Onesiphorus' testimony invites us to live more boldly, to look beyond ourselves, and to recognize that our actions, no matter how small they may seem, can have an eternal impact. His story challenges us to be light in the midst of darkness, to be those who bring hope where there is despair, and to become people who make a difference, even when no one is looking. As we reflect on the life of this extraordinary man, may we find inspiration to live with more intentionality and love. Onesiphorus is a living example that, even in times of adversity, it is possible to be an instrument of encouragement and transformation. What about you? Are you willing to be an Onesiphorus in someone's life? Onesiphorus is mentioned by Paul in two passages in the second letter to Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 16 to 18, and 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 19. His name means bearer of help or one who brings benefits. This already gives us a clue about his personality and mission. He was probably a leader or active member of the church in Ephesus, an important city in Paul's ministry. The apostle knew that community well, and it seems that Onesiphorus not only supported him in his hometown, but also had the courage to travel to Rome to seek out Paul in his prison. Imagine the effort involved. First, there was the distance. Rome was hundreds of miles from Ephesus. Second, there was the risk. Searching for Paul, a Christian prisoner, could easily have associated Onesiphorus with the same rebellion the Romans feared. Third, there was the uncertainty. He didn't know exactly where Paul was. Yet Onesiphorus searched diligently until he found him. 2 Timothy 1 verse 17. This teaches us that true faithfulness is not intimidated by obstacles. When was the last time you did something that required courage and sacrifice for someone you love? What makes Onesiphorus so special? He is not remembered for preaching a great sermon, performing miracles, or leading crowds. He is remembered for something we can all do: being present. We live in a time when emotional abandonment is common. How many times have you heard someone say, "I didn't know how to help, so I walked away"? Onesiphorus teaches us that even when we don't have all the answers, our presence can be an invaluable gift. He often encouraged me, writes Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 1 to 16. Onesiphorus, a biblical character of faithfulness and courage. Onesiphorus is a biblical character who, although mentioned briefly, has a number of interesting and valuable aspects that deserve to be explored. Here are some interesting facts about him that can shed light on his role in the scriptures and his example for us. An example of faithfulness in difficult times. Most of the Christians Paul knew and mentioned in his letters, especially in 2 Timothy, had turned away from him due to severe persecution and fear. However, Onesiphorus stood out for his faithfulness, defying the pressures of the time. He was not afraid to associate with a prisoner condemned for his faith, risking his own safety and reputation. His unwavering loyalty was a reflection of the courage it took to follow Christ in times of adversity. The meaning of the name Onesiphorus. The name Onesiphorus has a deeply symbolic meaning. It comes from the Greek and means bringer of help or one who brings benefits. This name could not be more appropriate, for he was precisely that to Paul, bringing him comfort and support at a critical time in his life. Onesiphorus' name, therefore, serves as a reminder of the impact of simple but powerful acts of help and support. Possible leadership in the church at Ephesus. In 2 Timothy 4 verse 19, Paul sends greetings to the household of Onesiphorus, suggesting that his family was influential within the church at Ephesus. This city, one of the most important in the Roman Empire and the center of early Christianity, had several leaders who played key roles in the growth of the church. Some scholars believe that Onesiphorus may have been a local leader or even a host of worship services in his own home, serving as a pillar of support for the Christian community of the time. Suggestion of martyrdom. The way Paul refers to Onesiphorus in the past tense, as someone who diligently sought me out and often encouraged me, and the lack of direct greetings to him may indicate that Onesiphorus had already died when Paul wrote the letter. In addition, Paul makes a special prayer, asking that the Lord may grant him mercy on that day, 2 Timothy 18, a possible reference to the final judgment. This detail raises the hypothesis that Onesiphorus may have died a martyr, like many other Christians of the time, being a supreme example of faithfulness to the end. A rare example of Paul's gratitude. Although Paul is known for his steadfastness and courage, He also knew how to express his genuine gratitude and appreciation. In his letters, when he mentions Onesiphorus, he does so in a warm and profound way. The way Paul speaks about him reveals how fundamental Onesiphorus' support was to his emotional and physical well-being. This teaches us that gratitude, especially in times of hardship, has the power to strengthen the bonds of friendship and faith. The importance of visits in Roman prisons. Life in Roman prisons at that time was extremely difficult and unhealthy. Prisoners depended on outside help to survive, as the Roman authorities did not provide adequate food, clothing, or medical care. Onesiphorus, in seeking out Paul in prison, not only risked his own life, but also brought essential provisions for the apostles' survival. His visit was more than a simple gesture of friendship. It was an act of courage and generosity, which possibly saved Paul's life in one of the darkest periods of his journey. These interesting facts about Onesiphorus not only reveal a fascinating character to us, but also challenge us to live with greater courage, loyalty, and generosity in our own context. He is a powerful example of how small, often unrecognized actions can make an eternal difference in someone's life. Don't underestimate the impact of a smile, an encouraging word, or a simple gesture of solidarity. For Paul, Onesiphorus' visits were not just acts of kindness. They were reminders that he was not alone. And here's an important reflection. How often do we miss opportunities to be Onesiphorus in someone's life? Let me share a contemporary story. A young man was struggling with depression. He had isolated himself from friends and family, feeling invisible. One day, an old friend simply showed up at his house with a meal and sat quietly by his side. No grand speech was necessary. Just a friend's presence was enough to begin a healing process. The story of Onesiphorus teaches us 3 great lessons. Courage in times of adversity. He was not intimidated by danger. This challenges us to be steadfast in our commitments, even when circumstances are not favorable. Fidelity in relationships. Onesiphorus did not abandon Paul when everyone else did. In a society that values convenience, we are called to be faithful friends. The power of presence. Small gestures can have a profound impact. Don't underestimate the value of being there for someone in difficult times. Think about it. Who is someone in your life who may be feeling abandoned or discouraged? How can you be an Onesiphorus to them today? The story of Onesiphorus is short but powerful. It reminds us that we don't need platforms or titles to make a difference. Often, the most impactful thing we can do is be there for someone, especially in the most difficult times. If you were inspired by this story, be sure to check out the other videos on the channel, where we explore more characters and life-changing lessons from the Bible. Like, share, and let us know in the comments. How can you be an Onesiphorus to someone today? See you in the next video.